Houthi attack on Ma'rib leaves more casualties, and the U.S. called it a barbaric war crime. UN Undersecretary for Humanitarian Affairs and U.S. envoy to Yemen discussed humanitarian crisis in the country. In his first visit to Yemen, as the UN envoy Hans Grunberg arrives at Aden to meet Prime Minister. Welcome to Yemen Today TV. This is the English news with me, Shaza Abdelbay. The number of victims due to the Houthi attack on Al Rawda district in Ma'rib rose to 5 civilians, including 3 children. Doctors Without Borders said its team in Ma'rib General Hospital treated 14 people. 8 of them are in critical conditions. In the same line, the United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights in Yemen, Renaud Mary, visited Ma'rib. The UN official described Houthi attacks as tragic crime, expressing his regret for the continued fall in civilian lives, including women and children. The United States condemned Houthi missile attack on the civilians in Ma'rib. In a press release for the Department of State, Washington stressed that civilians will suffer as long as the brutal Houthi military offensives continue. It added that there is an international consensus that now is the time to end the conflict in Yemen, noting that Houthis are standing in the way of peace. The State Department called on Houthis to stop fighting and engage in UN-led talks to bring an end to the devastating war in the country. The Human Rights Office in Ma'rib warned against a humanitarian crisis in Abdiya due to the siege imposed by Houthis. The office reported that there are more than 5,000 families inside the district, warning that 35,000 people suffer from severe lack of food and basic necessities. The Human Rights Office in Ma'rib called on international organizations to quickly put pressure on the Houthis to lift the siege on civilians in Abdiya. United Nations Relief Chief Martin Griffiths and United States Special Envoy to Yemen Tim Litterking discussed efforts to stabilize the Yemeni economy. During the conversation, Litterking repeated that addressing Yemen's economic crisis is critical to justifying humanitarian needs. Prime Minister Ma'in Abdel Malik discussed in Aden with UN envoy Hans Grunberg the latest developments in Yemen. Grunberg briefed the Prime Minister on the results of his meetings in Riyadh and Oman and his focus on ending violence and discussing a comprehensive peace agreement. The UN envoy also stressed the importance of the government's presence in Aden to carry out its duties. Later, Grunberg was briefed from the government of Aden on the economic conditions, including the need to return work in Aden commercial port. The United Nations envoy Hans Grunberg met the President of the Transitional Council in Aden. Grunberg stressed the need to reach a comprehensive political process through the agreed-upon arrangements. The head of the United Nations mission in support of Hudaydah Agreement has ended his duties without recording any notable success in implementing the Stockholm Agreement. Houthi continue violating the agreement and purposely attack civilians. More on the story is within this report.
The head of the United Nations mission in support of the Hodeidah Agreement, General Abhijit Guha, announced the end of his duties as head of the mission emanating from the Stockholm Agreement that was sponsored by the United Nations. Guha handed over duties to the deputy head of mission, Daniel Lacrosse Lake, 2 years after he led the mission as the third UN official in this position. The general said that the rate of violence in the city has decreased significantly. However, challenges remain.
Rates of violence have plummeted, and the population of Hodeidah has had the opportunity to resume their livelihoods. However, challenges remain. War is not an inevitability. The people of Hodeidah deserve more. They deserve peace now.
Meanwhile, those concerned with the Yemeni crisis disagree with the general statement. They believe that Houthi violations increased after deploying the UN mission in the city. The United Nations mission to support the implementation of Hodeidah Agreement was formed in late 2018 according to a UN resolution to support the Stockholm Agreement and spare Hodeidah from the conflict. The mission supports the implementation of a ceasefire. The team supervised the redeployment of forces in the city and ports of Hodeidah, but the stumbling block is still dominant amid Houthi militia's refusal to implement the terms of the agreement. The UN mission, whose headquarters is under the control of Houthi militia, has become subject to Yemeni criticism after it failed to implement the agreement for the third year. It failed to neutralize Hodeidah Port 2, a lifeline for millions of residents. The UN mission is still a hostage to Houthis, as Houthi militia violated the Security Council Resolution 2452 by imposing restrictions on the movements of the UN mission. This reached to the extent of not referring Houthis' involvement in the deliberate sniper killing of one of the liaison officers of the government forces while he was working at an international fire control post. On April 12th, the Yemeni government announced the suspension of its teamwork in the Coordination Committee in Hodeidah. This came after Houthis' killing of Colonel al-Sulayhi, one of the observers in the team. The silence over Houthis' resistance has caused thousands of civilian casualties, most of them children. Material losses were caused too, and the continuous displacement of families. The succession of 3 chairs of the UN mission is an indication of the lack of progress. From General Patrick Cameret, Danish General Michael Lolsgaard, who failed to implement the agreement, and finally to the Indian General Abhijit Guha, who barely succeeded in setting up 5 ceasefire observation checkpoints. Since Stockholm Agreement and the ceasefire under the auspices of the United Nations in December 2018, Houthi militia has deliberately committed humanitarian crimes against innocent civilians by bombing villages, residential neighborhoods, and farms in Hodeidah, in light of a suspicious international silence for these violations. It is clear that Houthis cover up their crimes against civilians in Hodeidah under the so-called Stockholm Agreement that serves no one but Houthis' interests.
Still in Hodeidah, a local source said that the militias targeted homes of citizens in Bani Afif south of Tuhaita with heavy weapons. The source added that the militias targeted other residential neighborhoods with medium machine guns and fired their sniper weapons at citizens' farms. In Hodeidah, a pregnant woman was injured in a mine explosion left by the rebels east of the city. Joint forces thwarted an attack by Houthi militia on their positions in Al-Dala. A military source confirmed that violent confrontations after the militia tried to penetrate positions of the joint forces. A number of militia members were killed and wounded in the clashes. In Taiz, government forces made field progress northwest of the governorate. Military source said violent clashes erupted after the Houthi militia tried to penetrate positions of the government forces close to the mountain of Han and Al Rabi'i. The rebels were inflicted with losses in lives and equipment. The death toll of the Houthi militia on the battlefronts increased during the past month. The number of Houthi casualties reached 408, out of whom 250 had military ranks. Most of the dead were killed in Ma'rib fronts, the western coast, Al-Jawf, Al-Bayda, Shabwa, and Al-Dala. More on the story is within this report.
In his latest speech to his supporters, the leader of the Houthi rebels asked them to push more fighters in the front lines of Ma'rib. The call for death sounded in the battlefield with more than 400 Houthi militants killed during the past couple of weeks. The new numbers are indicators of how tough this time is on the rebels. Most of the killed Houthis were in Ma'rib, where the rebels are racing the time for a penetration to secure them a political and tactical gain. The fighting is flaring in the south of Ma'rib. The Harib front was a scene for heavy fighting between the government forces backed by the tribes and Houthi rebels. The latter were inflicted with losses in lives and equipment. The losses in Houthi lines continued during the last month, with media sources reporting that the rebels have buried 136 of their members. Among them, there were 76 who held military ranks. The appalling fact is that most of the reported killings were for children or newly recruited. Most of the killings among Houthis were in the governorates that are under their control. Amran, Al-Jawf, Al-Bayda, and even Sa'da were the scenes in which Houthi militants were killed most. This fact may shed a light on how shaken the Houthi are on the areas under their control. In Hodeidah, the militia suffers daily heavy losses in every front because of the infiltration attempts it makes, in violation to the Stockholm Agreement. Al-Jawf is also a place where the rebels were inflicted with heavy losses after the government forces launched a massive campaign in the governorate, where they took back some areas from Houthis' hands. The day-by-day losses among Houthis sent an alarm to them of the bad consequences of their rebellion. This too gives hope to the Yemenis that salvation is near.
Coming next. Despite war calamities, Yemenis show great determination to seek education.
أقول لك راحت بالغداء لأهلها شلت الغداء وراحت بالأهلها في المزرعة. والمزرعة ركبت على حمار ما حتى نص المزرعة وانفجر فيها اللغم. دعست على اللغم وانفجر فيهم. الحمار انتهى ما أدرى وتبقعت رجليها كامل. نغير منها نغير الشبعلة اللي هي البنت سابحة من دور رجليها لما صافناها طبية أقرب طبية وصافناها لهي بطلت رجليها كامل.
قلت أزود هلي وقابل لي لعب وطبعته تحت الزواية.
Welcome back. World Teachers' Day is held annually on 5 October to celebrate all teachers around the globe. Teachers in Yemen, however, face many challenges, including disrupted salaries and poor teaching environment. More on the story is within this report.
Since the escalation of the war in Yemen about 7 years ago, about 2,000 schools have been out of service, either due to damage caused to them or due to being turned into shelters for the displaced. The dire situation in Yemen, including the ongoing conflict, natural disasters, outbreaks of cholera, measles, polio, and poverty, deprives more than 2 million children of education, according to a joint statement by 4 international organizations, including UNESCO and UNICEF. This dire situation is not only faced by children, but also the teachers. And as today, the 5th of October, is the World's Teachers' Day, who should be celebrating worldwide on this special day. Yemeni teachers are deprived of this right, as they haven't received their salaries since 2016. International organizations have issued a joint call to resume paying the salaries of nearly half of Yemeni teachers and school staff, estimated at 160,000 teachers and employees, who haven't received their salaries. They suggested that the delay in paying salaries would likely lead to a complete collapse of the education sector and impact millions of Yemeni children, especially the most marginalized groups as well as girls. The war and the accompanying withdrawal of schools from service, the increase in dropout rates, and the suspension of teachers' salaries all restricted the continuation of education to its minimum levels. Related to the provision of textbooks and other requirements of the educational process. Even before the war, public education suffered from many crises, including severe overcrowding in classrooms and a shortage of teachers. Today, the country is going through a real catastrophe, as the educational process is suspended. Also, private schools too cannot absorb all the burden that public schools were doing, not to mention the inability of people to pay their costs. About 1,600 school buildings were destroyed during confrontations and air attacks. But even in places where there are still schools, children cannot attend classes because they are forced to work to contribute to the family's daily sustenance. The cessation of the educational process benefits the conflicting parties, as school-age children turn into fierce fighters. The worst fighter is the fighter at this dangerous age. He can be mobilized easily and he goes to battle with a high fighting spirit in defense of issues that were portrayed to him as big and crucial in defense of religion and country. The education crisis can only be resolved by solving the main issue of Yemen, which is the end of war and the end of the political conflict. Without that, the education crisis and all other disasters resulting from the war will remain and will only get worse.
Minister of Water and Environment Tawfiq Al-Sharjabi discussed with the charge to affairs of the U.S. Embassy in Yemen, Catherine Wesley, the latest developments of the Safer oil tanker. U.S. officials stressed that Washington is developing plans to confront a disaster by providing advice to trained Yemeni cadres. During the meeting, they reviewed international efforts to press on Houthis to allow United Nations experts access to the tanker. Yemen is experiencing a severe economic crisis. Indicators say that the country is moving towards a comprehensive collapse if the international community did not respond. More on the story is within this report.
Yemen is experiencing a complicated and severe economic crisis, resulting from a general state of macroeconomic instability. This crisis, with its various repercussions, is pushing towards a comprehensive collapse if the international community does not intervene to stop it. This critical situation prompted the Yemeni Prime Minister Ma'in Abdul Malik and his Foreign Minister Ahmed Awad bin Mubarak to appeal to brotherly and friendly countries to provide urgent support to save the economy and to curb the risks and repercussions arising from it. The cumulative and compound economic crisis that Yemen is experiencing today puts the country on the brink of a comprehensive economic collapse, according to what macroeconomic indicators say. During the period 2014 and 2020, real GDP witnessed a cumulative contraction of about 50%, and it had declined in the period from 2014 to 2018, only from $42.45 billion to $23.49 billion. The annual growth rate of GDP declined from 7.7% in 2010 to 0.5% in April 2021. In the Global Competitiveness Report, the annual report that measures the elements of countries' economic competitiveness and their ability to grow, Yemen ranked 140 out of 141 countries. In the Doing Business 2020 report, which assesses the business and investment environment in 190 countries, Yemen ranked 187 globally, regressing from 133 in 2014. Inflation rose from 8% in 2014 to 30.6% in 2021, and the national currency collapsed as the value of the Yemeni rial fell against foreign currencies in the exchange market to an unprecedented level, and in government-controlled areas it reached more than 1,000 rials for every dollar. Inflation and the depreciation of the currency were reflected in a sharp rise in prices and a decline in commercial activities, and unemployment rate in Yemen is expected to reach 20% by the end of 2021, according to Trading Economics Global macro models and analysts' expectations. The situation in Yemen keeps deteriorating by all aspects. This leads to a comprehensive collapse of the country if the international community did not intervene to stop it.
The National Committee Against Coronavirus announced 20 new cases of the COVID-19 and 5 deaths. With the current updates, the total confirmed cases are 9,234, including 1,748 deaths and 5,806 cases of recovery. Here's a reminder of the main headlines. The Houthi attack on Ma'rib leaves more casualties, and U.S. call it a barbaric war crime. UN Under-Secretary for Humanitarian Affairs and U.S. envoy to Yemen discuss humanitarian crisis in the country. In his first visit to Yemen as the UN envoy, Hans Grunberg arrives at Aden to meet Prime Minister. This is the end of the news. Thank you for watching.